Welcome to this retrospective slash review for Ghouls and Ghosts, specifically the version that came out on the Sega Genesis or Mega Drive for those outside of North America. And one of the nice things about a lot of these early Genesis games is that they had a nice scrolling thing in the background. So while you see images of the game playing in the background, I will go ahead and give you my thoughts on the game and some of the ways of going about to playing it nowadays. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and just get into everything. And I guess let's just start with the obvious um, aspect of this. I would like to say that this game is a drastic improvement over its predecessor, Ghosts and Goblins, in pretty much every conceivable category that you can think of, at least in my personal opinion. Now, a lot of that is, well, yeah, no kidding. It's a much better system, the Genesis compared to the Nintendo. Uh, much stronger system from a hardware perspective. So you would expect the graphics to be greatly improved, and they most certainly are. Um, but that's not the only area it's improved. I mean, if I, well, music greatly improved? Well, that's a good question because that's the one good thing about the NES thing that I actually thought was a strength of it. So I'd say the music was possibly modestly improved here because it wasn't. I mean, there's more tracks because there's only like three music tracks in the NES version, and so there's actually a few more tracks here in this one. So I think from that perspective, there's a better variety of music, and the music that was there was pretty good. But like I said, the music that was in the NES was probably a highlight of that version of the game. So I wouldn't say the music is vastly improved, but it is improved. I mean, not only do you have more tracks for the different stages, but you also have boss music that plays when you get to a boss area. So there's definitely some more variety here, and I think what's there does sound good. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of people criticize a lot of Genesis games for the sound quality. I personally don't see the problem with the Genesis sound that some people seem to have for it, but I think it sounds good on the Genesis as well, and you can't go wrong with that opening um, Ghosts and Goblins, Ghouls and Ghosts theme, whichever one you want to say for the first stage. Is just iconic, and they did a great job with it there as well. So graphics vastly improved, music slightly improved. One thing I will say that I think I read on a review somewhere about this game that they talked about the backgrounds being relatively bland on this game. And this is a good example here. You can look at it. And honestly, I mean, the backgrounds are definitely there. And maybe they are a little bland to a certain extent. But that's probably a good thing, to be completely and totally honest with you, because that's one of the problems I had with Ghosts and Goblins is like the backgrounds, you blended into the backgrounds many times in the original game. And so I personally think the backgrounds are actually not as obtrusive here in this game. They're definitely there, but they don't detract from the rest of the game and what you're seeing. So I think the backgrounds are actually quite fine. And overall, just, the graphics are just really amazing in this game. But I think the biggest improvement to this game that just cannot be understated is the controls. My goodness. That one area alone, they did such a good job with. Like, this game controls so much better than the previous game. It's like a night and day difference with how much better this game controls. And at the end of the day, you think about it, your character's really not that much more powerful in this game compared to the the first Ghosts and Goblins game, because you can still only really take just the one hit. Even if you have the gold armor on, you can just take one hit and then you're running around in your boxer shorts. So from that aspect, it feels very good. It doesn't have that sticky feeling that the first game did. And you can shoot up, you can shoot down. There was an option in the options screen that said allow diagonal. I'm not really sure what allowing diagonal did, because it never really allowed me to shoot diagonally. So, but that option was there for some reason. Not sure what it did for me, but it was there. But the game, it just, I can't say enough about how good it controls, and it just how good it feels to play the game. It just controls really well. It gives you two difficulties, a practice difficulty and a professional difficulty. And I think I just read briefly somewhere where professional is basically similar to what what you would get in the arcade. Now, I could be wrong, but I believe like on your second playthrough, even if you start on practice, on the second playthrough and it ups the difficulty, it basically puts it on professional difficulty, even though it does continue to say practice in the bottom corner. But you can definitely tell the difficulty was it was a higher level of difficulty on the second playthrough, even on practice mode. So I haven't actually had a chance to try it out on professional difficulty, so I'm not sure how different it is on that. But I will say for the most part, even though the difficulty, it was a noticeable enhancement as far as difficulty is concerned, it wasn't to the point where I felt like I ever really got frustrated. There's one point where I did get frustrated, and I will go ahead and mention that right now, and that was on the second cycle when I got to the stage 4 boss, and I had the new Psycho Cannon weapon. That was really the only point in this game where I actually started to feel frustrated. And that's something that is actually quite avoidable. If you don't get that Psycho Cannon, you stick with the normal weaponry, like say the dagger, for instance. It still would probably be a difficult boss fight, because that boss is just kind of annoying in and of himself, or itself, whatever it is. But I think that really for the most part, even though it took me a while to beat that guy, I was like, no, I can do this. And it wasn't to the point where I was just frustrated. I was like, man, there's just no way to do this. Everything in this game, the level of challenge, it's not so over the top that it makes you disheartened. It's just a fun game to play, and at the end of the day, that's the big point right there for me, is it's fun. It's a very fun game, and that was something that was kind of missing in the first one, if we're being 100% honest here. So even with all the improvements that they had in the game, it still was a very fun experience for me. Weaponry, to be honest, obviously the dagger still is one of the best weapons in the game, for me at least. But the discus was also a very good weapon, and I was able to use it. In fact, there was actually sometimes I felt the discus might actually be preferable to the dagger, the way it could slide on the ground. Really, about the only two weapons I didn't really like a lot were the axe. I felt the axe was just way too slow, and the sword, of course, because it didn't have any range at all. I can't really say I had too much time with the lance, because once you replace the lance fairly early on, you almost never go back to it, really. But the lance actually is a pretty decent weapon. The fire, torch, flame ward, whatever you want to call it, that is improved, but it's not a very good weapon either. But it's not pointless like it was in Ghosts and Goblins. It actually does serve a bit of a purpose. and I felt like I could use it better than the axe, comparatively speaking. Um, but the variety of weaponry in the game is pretty good, and the golden armor adds a whole new aspect to the game by giving you powered up attacks for all the different weapons. Um, Once again, the axe's powered up attack is kind of like, well, what is this? So the axe just falls to the bottom of the list in pretty much every conceivable category, even with the gold armor on. But that's one thing where the torch, I'm going to just call it torch. The torch actually did very well. The fact that it actually had a almost like screen clearing attack you could use with it compared to a lot of the other ones. But even the lance has a good special attack with the gold armor, and of course the clones with the dagger was really good. And it's very subtle actually, but the psycho cannon, you don't have a special attack, but it powers up your normal attack substantially actually. So you may not notice it at first, but it actually makes a huge difference wearing gold armor using the psycho cannon. So yeah, definitely variety of weaponry that's probably also improved, but only slightly so much compared to the first game, but it is an improvement as well. The difficulty isn't insane like it is on the first one, and to be fair, a lot of the difficulty from the first one came from the controls. And so with this game controlling so much better, obviously that brings the difficulty down substantially as well. So, I just had like a quick guide that I had listed up just to kind of see how many levels were. And they would say like this level here for the 5th level is insanely difficult. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, but after playing Ghosts and Goblins, I'm like, where's the insane difficulty? It's not that it was actually not bad at all, really. I think I had the discus when I went through it initially, and it was actually almost kind of simple to be fair. So I don't think this game is a punishing difficulty. Everything, there is some difficulty. I don't want to say it's easy, but the difficulty seems fair, and you don't get frustrated because it's just being a jerk to be a jerk, with the exception of that boss in stage 4. That's the only area where they're kind of being, on the second playthrough, that boss, they're like, yeah, we're going to treat you like garbage now. That was the one area where they were pretty bad when it came to difficulty, but even then I still felt like I can get through this. And compared to some of the levels that I played in Ghosts and Goblins, it still wasn't anywhere near as bad. If there's anything I would probably criticize the game for, it would be the fact that there is no real opening story per se. And I had taken out my Switch. I'm like, well, maybe I can pull up the manual, because apparently the actual opening story is in the manual for this game, which I don't have, and maybe I just don't know what I'm doing on the Switch because I don't use my Switch that often. I couldn't find the actual manual even on the Switch emulator, so I don't really know what the opening circumstances were to this game. So I mean, I guess it would have been nice if they had some sort of intro screen, something to let you know what's going on to get the game started, but they didn't. So that's definitely a slight criticism of the game, I would say. And honestly, it's a fairly short game too, really. I mean, even me playing through completely 2 times, I got through in, I said less than 5 hours initially. I actually got through in less than 4.5. I got through pretty quickly. And the only reason it took me that long is because I did try to do that little achievement where I beat the stage 4 boss with the psycho cannon. If I had had a better weapon there, I might have actually got through this game substantially faster, because it took me about an hour to beat that guy. Sad to admit that, but that's basically how long it took me to beat him. Everything else, every other stage, I got through pretty quickly. So it is a short game, I would say, and that would be, a fair criticism for it. But, the fact of the matter is the game is available on the Switch Online. The fact that it's part of Switch Online, the expansion pack, that's how you have to go about getting the game. I think that's kind of crappy, but that's more to do with Nintendo's policies, to be rather than a criticism of this game, to be fair. So I don't like that aspect. The Genesis is in the expansion pack area, not part of the normal Switch Online, but is what it is. And that's really the only way legally to go about playing the game nowadays. I did play it briefly on the Switch just to see what the emulator felt like, and it didn't really feel too much different than the emulators I used here on my computer. There are two emulators that there's one emulator I usually use is Genesis Plus GX. That's kind of like my go-to emulator more often than not when it comes to Genesis games, but there was one achievement that wasn't popping for me, and so I tried out the Blastum emulator instead, Blastum Core I should say, and that one did work, and I think that's one of the more accurate emulators, so it strives for a more accurate type experience. So that's both good and bad from a certain viewpoint, in the fact that there's literally no options with that emulator. So there's certain stuff you can turn on with Genesis Plus GX, like disabling sprite limit, or you could even overclock it if you needed to for certain games, which you don't need to do for this one. And just those kind of options aren't there with the Blastum Core. But to be fair, it worked really well, and I think that emulator worked all the way through the game, and I don't really have a problem with it. But if you want to have a little more options, more video options, more things you can select and do, you might want to look at, say, the Genesis Plus GX Core instead, especially if you're not interested in getting achievements, because it seemed like almost everything worked. There's really only one achievement I tried to get that didn't pop, and it was the one where you get turned into an old man, oddly enough. So an achievement that was more of a you getting penalized kind of thing. So that's kind of funny. Other than that, I think that this game is definitely a worthwhile playthrough for anybody if you're a fan of the series, or if you like these older style games. It's an early Genesis game, because you can see there the date stamp of 1989. So this is even pre-90s Genesis, so very early game. And if you compare it graphically and whatnot to a lot of the early games, I would say it holds up really well. It may be one of the best early Genesis games, and I'm not just saying that. I really do think that, just because I've played some of the early Genesis games, and some of them were pretty bad actually, but this one is actually very good and holds up even to some of the later Genesis games. So I mean, it's not even, it's good for an early Genesis game. It's just a good game. Yeah, I think there were some games that came out later in the Genesis life cycle that were better, but at the end of the day, I think this is still, it definitely deserves its place in the conversation for some of the best games on the Genesis, for sure, because it's just a great time. Not only great for the series, but great overall, and highly recommend you give it a shot. If you want to get into the Ghosts and Goblins series, this may be a better starting point. 100%. It really may be a better starting point. I would probably give this a score of 90%, to be honest with you, because, I mean, other than the fact that it is very short, it's just a great game. It's worth the playthrough, and really awesome to play around Halloween time. So definitely give Ghouls and Ghosts a try, because I think you'll enjoy it. Decently challenging, but I mean, I think pretty much most anybody nowadays should be able to, if you're any decent of a gamer, you should be able to make it through this game and enjoy yourself. Well, that's my thoughts on the game. So thank you very much for watching this video. I'll see y'all in the next one. Take care.